One other area I want to make sure we dive into is the blue zones. And you're somebody who is really qualified to talk about this. And I think it's really important we have the counter arguments and points because this has taken such a stronghold in modern society, especially with the more recent Netflix docuseries, which I haven't actually watched, but I know a lot of people were talking about it. And you, as an archaeologist, somebody who's traveled the world, spent time with these different people, and you've been to Sardinia, which is the original blue zone, I'd like to get your opinion. So let's start with your story to Sardinia, when that was, and what the diet was like.
We went to Sardinia. We had to actually, the place in Sardinia we were at, spent a lot of time at, was actually the epicenter of the first blue zone ever identified. It was not only in that same, in Sardinia, it was actually in the same village. So I feel well versed to talk about at least that experience. What we experienced there was the exact opposite from a food perspective as what's portrayed as typical of the blue zones. So, and we did watch as much as I could handle the Netflix special, and I couldn't do it anymore, but we watched the one on Sardinia, and I think one of the other ones, I couldn't take it anymore. This is what we experienced. We experienced people that were so incredibly connected to their food that every single meal we ate was, the ingredients were created and sourced by people that were sitting at the table. They were all prepared by people sitting at the table. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Like I couldn't believe places like that still existed. I mean, certainly with tribes and groups who are in the middle of the bush somewhere, absolutely. But I mean, we were in a village, a proper village. Some would even consider it a small city or at least a town on the side of this mountain, cars driving everywhere, modern homes. And we're sitting in these kitchens, sitting down to a meal, full-fledged meal, multi-course meals. And every ingredient in there was grown or harvested by somebody sitting at that table and 100% prepared. The meats, the cheeses, all breads, all of it by people sitting at that table. So that was the first part of it. The second part of it was you'd be hard-pressed to find a vegetable at most of these meals. Like they existed, but as side pieces. The only vegetables we consumed were, in some of these you could obviously imagine, we had some tomatoes, we had olives, we had eggplant, we had garlic, we had basil, probably onions, although I don't remember it specifically. And that was it. Meanwhile, we had sheep and the entirety of the sheep. Like it'd be hard for you to sit down at a meal and eat meat and not see all the other parts of the animal on the table. So the first big meal we had, they have these really cool spits they make with motors that do windshield wipers on cars, and they make these rotisserie things that every home had an outdoor sort of fireplace grill like thing, and they had this meat spinning, and it was this literally huge spit, and half of it was a huge shoulder of this animal, and the other half were all the intestines wrapped around like this, and it's sitting there going like this. Every time we sat down at a table, somebody was so proud. They brought out a whole bunch of their homemade cheeses and a whole bunch of their cured meats. Literally, you would go, if you went to a house in another part of the world, they'd bring out a bag of potato chips or cheese and crackers. It was meat and cheese, literally every single place that we went, every single time we sat down at another house. It was unbelievable. The experiences, we were there to learn how to make a certain kind of cheese called caio de cabretto, which is made from unweaned goat stomachs. But we harvested these goats and then all of a sudden literally proceeded to make these extravagant dishes using the entirety of the goat. I mean, literally the bones, the marrow, the intestines, the intestinal contents, all the organs, the meat, the head, all of it was prepared and consumed in certain ways. So from a food perspective, it was literally the exact opposite of what's being portrayed. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was that extravagantly different. But what I will say is what we found about the rest of their lifestyle was very similar to what was being reported. There was a lot of exercise, just walking all the time. The way people dealt with each other was fantastic. In fact, I asked multiple people, I said, hey, you know about this blue zone thing? They're like, yeah, we heard it. I said, what's the key? What's the key? And every one of them said, we're nice to each other. I mean, it was brilliant, and they are. So what I loved to see was, okay, first off, the way that we're approaching food here was directly in line with the way that they're actually eating. Everything from the actual ingredients themselves to their own time investment and connection with their raw materials and also the food production and processing itself. But that it wasn't just about the food. It was about the fact that they're always moving. It was the fact that they're nice to one another, and it's all of the different factors of life that seem to have come together in a place like this to produce not only people that have a lifespan as long as they have, but a health span as long as they have. We regularly saw people over 100 years old that were living completely independently, that were walking up and down the sides of the mountains. I mean, these roads were like steep. Everybody's walking. It was magnificent. It was the way humans should be living, and I'm convinced we can be there. But it takes all of those things to come together at concert at the same time. I will say there is a wine that they have there that is suggested to be this wine of longevity. It's a Canalou grape. And they kind of joke about it, though. They know that it's sort of been branded like this. It is a wine that they drink regularly, but they all kind of joke that it isn't necessarily keeping them living any longer.
When it comes to the food, zoning in on this piece, you mentioned how it's so polar opposite how it's being portrayed by the Blue Zones brand. Any idea how that got so lost in translation? And I'll add to this, we're talking about one of the Blue Zones here. Have you traveled to any of the others?
No, but I have talked to people like Mary Ruddick who have. And other than Loma Lindo, which is the Seventh-day Adventist community, which I'm confident, I haven't been there, but I'm confident what's being portrayed from a vegetarian perspective is probably very accurate. All of the rest of them, I have talked to people that have been to the others, and they report a very similar thing that I have.
Any idea why things got so lost in translation?
Oh, I'm confident it was intentional. And in fact, I talked to, one of the things that's portrayed about Sardinia is they eat a massive amount of this minestrone soup, some vegetable-based minestrone soup. And some of the people there, in fact, I was in the home. The meal that I'm mostly referring to as I'm talking to you, that was the centerpiece. Their home. BBC came out to do a big special there, and they did it in their home, and they were joking about it the whole time. And they're like, I don't know where this minestrone soup thing came from. Like we eat it, but it's rare that we even eat it. It was so funny, but I'm convinced it was intentional. And there's probably a few places where things are lost in translation. So I'll give you one example. Every single time we visited somebody, every single time we came into somebody's kitchen, I mean, literally, there was not one exception. They tried to bring out meat and some of their cured meats, things like prosciutto or salamis that they made, that sort of thing, from their own animals. They butchered and cured them themselves, and also cheeses that they made. So both of them are animal-based foods every single time. And then on the one Sunday, and then we had other meals and there was meat and things. But on that one Sunday, we had a barbecue. Like they called it a barbecue, but it was that, big piece of the sheep and all the intestines. And it was a big to do. The entire day was spent making this food, and it was a huge multi-course meal and all this. So a few days later, I said to them, through a translator, remember, so there are things lost in translation, both because of language barriers, but also because of cultural barriers. And the way that we word things truly impacts the way that we view the world. I mean, in very important ways. And this is a significant one. So I said, okay, at the end of the experience that we had at this particular village, I said, all right, how much meat, how many days a week do you actually eat meat? And he said, 1. And I'm like, wait, I've spent how long with you, and we've had meat at every single meal. He's like, no, that's not meat. Sunday night, that was meat. The barbecue, that was meat. Like, what are you talking about? And the way they interpreted that question was the big to-do, the big barbecue, the animal on the spit, the intestines, that whole thing. That to them was meat. But all the other meat they consumed throughout the rest of the week wasn't part of that consciousness. It wasn't part of that equation. They didn't consider that sitting down and having a plate of meat. It's almost like if same thing here. If I said the word barbecue instead, like let's say you ate all sorts of meat all week long and you had ham sandwiches and you had chicken over here and you had this and this and this, but every Sunday you had a full-blown barbecue and all your friends and family came. And I said to you, how many days a week do you barbecue? You'd be like, oh, well, one. But you ate meat at every single meal. So I don't know. It was only that one instance, but I found it very interesting that when I use the term meat, and I've eaten meat with this family like multiple times, they considered that one day the day that they eat meat. It was interesting.
To me, this could be the most important part of the interview because there is so much momentum behind these books and this docuseries. And there's so much confusion in our world about what to eat. You can only imagine the number of people eating plant-based, vegan, because they're hearing about these people living the longest and, seeing these beautiful landscapes a lot of times in different parts of the world where these people are living. And it's just so picturesque. So I think it's important, somebody who's actually been to one of these and talked to other people that have visited these sites, to see that there's more to the story.
Yeah, there's a lot more. And I will say they drank wine and they ate bread. And it was interesting to me to see that as well. And I'm not, again, suggesting there's any nutritional requirement for bread in our diets. I'm certainly not suggesting there's any nutritional requirement for wine in our diets. What I am suggesting is these orthorexic, polarizing, top-down, soundbite conversations around food that make all of us feel inadequate because they're not reality for so many of us. And even if they do become reality, they're probably short-lived sort of spurts where we can sustain, whether it's a financial or an emotional sort of this approach to diet. The healthiest people in the world were sitting there enjoying every bite of food that they had, but enjoying a little bit of bread, enjoying a little bit of wine, and having this incredibly diverse diet that is what listen, animal-based across the board. They had more fat, meat, organs, intestines, chyme, all of it, and milk and fermented dairy products. Like, it was the basis of everything that we ate. But they also enjoyed some vegetables. They also enjoyed some bread. They also enjoyed some wine, and they did it in a way that allowed them to truly enjoy every part of the experience of sharing food together. And I think it's a model for all of us to look at. Again, I'm not suggesting you start eating bread and start drinking wine. What I am suggesting is there are healthy ways to go about including those foods in our diet if that is a part of your diet.
I did pull this line from Dan Buettner on another interview he did, who's the face behind the Blue Zones. He says here, we made the decision to stay 100% plant-based within the Blue Zone family, which to me is taking away from the credibility of what they're actually seeing. They're making this seem like a business decision to follow this certain dietary framework that fits a certain narrative. Again, you can take what you will from that, but those were his words.
And I'll say this too, to sort of wrap this up. It's more than just this conversation. This sort of false reporting and false narrative have a lot of ramifications, a lot. And here's an example. So there is a place that I know of that oversees over 700 homeless people. They provide healthcare, they provide medical care, they provide food. And years ago, when this became a big thing, they made the decision to hire a food service company that was touting, advertising that they followed the Blue Zone approach in the food that they created. So here you have a population of people that could, I would argue, could benefit the most from nourishing food. And you have a food service provider that is providing almost animalless diets to these people. And I actually went and saw what was being supplied. And it was horrible. I think they had meat once a week in their diets, literally once a week. And it was usually in the form of some kind of farmed fish, tilapia or something like this. The fats that they had a container this big of some sort of vegetable oil that I couldn't recognize. That was the only fat that was going into their diet. It was a very low fat diet, but the fat that was going in was this horrid vegetable oil. So these narratives become reality for a lot of people. And things like the FDA requirements and regulations, they're not only things that somebody in their home maybe could decide to adopt to feed their family. They become the mandate for schools and for hospitals and for prisons. And again, we're talking about populations that could absolutely benefit from smart, healthy choices. So it's more than just misreporting. It's literally ruining lives and putting structures in place that are going to take us years or decades to crawl out of. And meanwhile, people are suffering.
And last piece I'll add to this too is that in 2020, the Blue Zone brand ended up selling to Adventist Health, who's affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So you can just see how this has become such a business, and it seems like there could be some ties there behind the scenes.
100%. There's no doubt in my mind. So I would say to everybody listening to this, there is the two best things you can do is listen to as many people talk about food as possible, filter it through your own, mind and the way that you view the world and your place in it, and then make your own decisions, because there is no one person that has it all right. And I can promise you, just like 5 years ago, if I was talking about supplements, I've changed my mind on some of these things. I mean, look at somebody like Paul Saladino. Paul Saladino is changing his mind every 3 months about something. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a healthy thing. But recognize that I don't care how well-intentioned the person that you're listening to on a podcast or author that you're reading on a book or dietitian you're listening to, no matter how well-intentioned they are, the landscape is shifting all the time. Our knowledge base is shifting all the time. Food is incredibly political, as you know, and all that's changing a lot of this right now as well. Filter it, and then empower yourself to make your own decisions.
And I just feel it's so important to have the discussions about these different pieces so people can at least see these different ideas. And then if they choose to, they can do their own research and dive deeper into it and realize that the first story that comes at them might not be the full truth or the truth at all.
Absolutely. And then also remember, and maybe I can close with this. I might have said this last time. I fully believe this. The diet that healed you is probably not the diet you should be on for the rest of your life. We need to continue to shift. Making a shift in your diet is not a failure. I know I've talked to so many people, I've even felt this myself, that they've made a dietary choice, they've seen some improvement, and then the idea, you're so excited that this dietary approach has worked for you. You've told all your friends and family, I am now a carnivore, I'm now a keto, whatever it is, and I'm now a vegan, whatever, and you've told everybody, you've identified with this approach, and then now things are starting to happen where you're like, maybe I should adjust this, maybe I should adjust this. And you force yourself into not changing because you've built an identity around it, because you've told other people that you're whatever you are. And that's an incredibly unhealthy way to be. It's kind of like if I remember I lived in Shrewsbury, New Jersey, and I wrestled at Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio. And I took that 550-mile drive from the Jersey Shore to Columbus, Ohio, multiple times and back. And I even remember thinking then that there is, even if there was, if there was it was flat and there were no roads, and I thought, could I point my truck in the right direction so that I wouldn't have to turn my steering wheel and I'd end up in Columbus, Ohio? It would be absolutely impossible. I'd have the MapQuest, directions printed out. I'd have to make this turn and this turn and this turn and this turn and this turn. And over, 50 million turns, I'd finally end up at my apartment in Columbus, Ohio. It's like that with diets. There's a 0 chance probability that whatever decision you've made about your diet right now is the exact diet for you for the rest of your life. You're going to have to make a little bit of a change, address the things that are happening there, and then maybe make a little bit of a change. And that isn't a failure. Every one of those steps is a step towards success, and it's a step towards health.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
We went to Sardinia. The place in Sardinia we were at was actually the epicenter of the first blue zone ever identified. It was not only in Sardinia, it was actually in the same village. What we experienced there was the exact opposite from a food perspective.